Can I?
Can I?
Can I?
Can I see it through? Hello and welcome to Seeing It Through. I'm Anastacia Diaz. I wouldn't say I'm your host because, this isn't going to be a podcast in the sense of I'm telling you things. I think this is just a creative outlet for something that changed me. On the day that it will be released, or at least on the day that I hope you'll be seeing it, it'll be the 17th of July, a day that really marked everything changing for me. It'll be 4 years since I've lost my mom. Something that has undeniably transformed me and has absolutely made me pivot. I think when most people think about grief and losing a parent specifically, you imagine that you're 60, mortgages are paid, children are raised, and you get to kind of think that that's how it'll happen. But it was so different for me. I was 19, it was 3 weeks before my 20th birthday, and I lost probably the most important person in my life. You gotta stop it, bro. Now, at that point, I had to make a lot of tough decisions. Everything remained up in the air after losing my mom for about a year and a half. It was intense, it was crazy, and I think most importantly, it was so unexpected. I had never, ever imagined losing my mom, let alone at such a young age. So I had to sit myself down, and I distinctly remember it. I sat myself down in the bathtub and I was like, listen, grief is not going to make me bitter. If anything, I'm going to make sure that grief makes me kinder. And I'd like to think, I really like to hope that I've been a kinder version since losing her. It made me transform. It made me think about everything that I could ever imagine. Because at that point, it changed. I had to reconsider what going forward looked like for me. You're lost for a period of time, especially when it's your first big loss. There isn't a guidebook or a handbook to how it happens, right? Now, this huge person in your life, a person in your daily life is just gone. Routine right out the window, and you're faced with legalities, you're faced with all of these things that you never in your wildest dreams anticipated. So I got on with it. For the longest time, I was trying to really construct a life, not even reconstruct a life, just construct a life without her. And what I don't think a lot of people speak about is when you lose someone, it's like a month turns into 2 and routines are formed just without them. And you can feel the absence, but as time goes by, you slowly realize that, okay, it's all right. And in reconstructing it, or constructing it rather, you realize that you have to be the one to put it together. There isn't a person that's waiting. There isn't a person that's doing it for you. I think especially when you lose a parent so young, you're kind of forced to be this very independent person. And that's what I molded myself into, and I forced myself into. And in between, you realize just what you'll never have again, but also what love looks like from beyond death. I don't think that if you spoke to me before losing my mom, I would have considered how love looks like before, how love looks like after death, right? I think even after losing her, I still feel her love. There are so many instances in my life where I have considered and reconsidered and thought about and imagined, and the only conclusion that I can come to is that her love has carried me through, and it continues to put me in positions where I get to do things that I love and things that I never imagined, because she's working from her the other side. It made me really just drown myself in a spirituality that death is not an end, but it's merely a difference of life. And I think that's something that I never realized before or even really considered, that love never ends. It just changes. So in losing her and in still feeling her love and still knowing to the bottom of my toes, to the depths of my souls, that she is still here, that she is still working, it made me trust a little more in the unknown. It made me a lot stronger, and I was always really persistent. Like, I have been the type of person that said, you know what, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it, and it's going to get done. But I think now it's trusting in that and not being so hell-bent. Like, just trying to essentially just dig your fingers into something isn't something I try to do anymore. Sorry. It's not something I try to do anymore, just merely because I understand that it'll get itself there. I don't need to try as hard. And I think that when you have guidance from the other side in losing someone you love so much, it becomes second nature to just be like, I'll be okay. And it taught me so much about acceptance, in that just because it's not what you want, it doesn't mean that it's not the worst thing. I think in losing my mom, I had to really redefine grief and what loss meant, because it looked so different for me. You know, being so young, being like having siblings, and being in the situation that I was like, okay, like grief isn't the worst thing. It's just so different. And there are definitely moments where I've sat and considered, like, what would my life look like if she were here? But in doing so, I ignore the beauty of what I have now that her presence in my life looks so different. When I consider my life as well now, and I think, like, would I have been able to grow in the way that I have? It's always, or rather, the question is posed to me a lot by the people that I love, and they're like, well, do you think that you could have gotten here any other way? And I just think it would have looked different. I think I would have been different. But I think in grief, if you allow it to, you kind of are given the opportunity so many times to appreciate what you do have. And I think that that's probably the best thing that grief could give you. I don't think it could give you a lot of good things unless you allow it to. But also, loss is this thing that can consume you in so many ways that it's hard to not get wrapped up in it for a little bit. And so whenever people tell me that they've lost somebody, or that it's this defining moment in their life, it's almost like yeah when the people tell me it's this defining moment, I give them the space to allow that, because I think in processing grief, but also in healing from loss, the first kind of acceptance is allowing yourself to own the fact that it won't be the same, that it will be this defining mark in your life, this defining situation, and moving from that. I think it's incredibly difficult to grieve someone and try to make the best of it. It's not impossible, but it is hard, especially when everything feels so hollow. And I remember after losing my mom, everything felt hollow. I did not think a house could feel small, because our house used to feel so big when she was alive. But now I sit and I ponder and I'm like, oh, this place feels so empty, so quiet, right? And I think when you give grief the room and the consideration, you'll realize that it's just love. And it's not something that I guess you could ever really run away from, because grief will have you knocked, bro, absolutely to the ground on a random Tuesday, 2 years after everything played out, and you'll wonder, like, why did it happen? I think a huge other conversation with the topic of grief is, you know, everything happens for a reason, and I've yet to find the reason. Honestly, I think that I can't tell anyone how many times that I heard that after losing my mom, and I considered, and I was like, what reason would be good enough, right? And I think that's where you as a person can allow yourself to assign reason to it. And I think that's where the goodness comes from. Another huge thing that I had to learn after my mom's passing was there is a huge necessity to speak about loss that I don't think many people acknowledge, right? And after losing my mom, as time went on, she became less and less a topic of conversation. Not because people didn't want to speak about her, but because people feared what it would do to me. And I think in me becoming so comfortable with grief and loss, it was imperative that I spoke about my mom. And I don't think enough people really acknowledge what that does for someone who's grieving, to, when it's acknowledged, right, to start asking questions. And obviously it's not going to be the same for everyone, and not everyone wants a question. But I think when you ask a grieving person, like, do you want to speak about it, it allows them a weight off their shoulder. As someone who has known grief for a while now, every time someone asks me a question after I tell them I've lost my mom, it's like, oh my gosh, yeah, of course I want to speak about it. This is a person I loved so much, right? And even over the past couple of years, I've made so many friends, and a part of that has been me speaking about my mom. So all of my friends are perfectly aware that I will speak about my mom, and I will speak about her like she's alive. And several friends, like, that I've told about my mom, have been like, okay, cool. And when they tell them that the babes is gone, they're like, oh. And it's scary for them. And then I have to have a conversation of like, I want to speak about her. She's still a huge part of my life. Grief and inevitably her as a person are still a huge part of my life, right? And I don't think enough people, out of fear really, out of discomfort, because grief and loss and all of those things intertwined are incredibly scary for someone who doesn't know it intimately. And I think that's a huge conversation to have with people, that it's necessary, and it's quite frankly a huge relief to speak about people that you've lost, right? And in cases where you're not given the opportunity and you don't give yourself the opportunity to speak about loss, I do think grief becomes this hole that is possible, that is capable really of swallowing you. Inevitably, I think grief is something, when you allow it to, it can become part of who you are in a way of perseverance, of strength, and not necessarily have to be this shadow work, this thing that you hide from people. Because I think a lot of people, when they hear about grief, they can also acknowledge there's so much beauty in losing someone because you've experienced so much love. And it's a bittersweet moment, it's a bittersweet situation and experience. But I do think there's so much courage in acknowledging that you have lost, but also loved before that, right? Another analogy, I think, that really helped me through the deepest parts of my grief was the ball in a box analogy, right? So obviously your life is the box and your grief is this ball. Now, when you first lose someone, this loss, this ball is really big. It's taking up a lot of space in your box, and that's completely valid, right? And because it's taking up so much space in your box, it's hitting the walls of your life, and it's triggering you, and it's hurting, and it's hard, right? But as time goes by, your box gets bigger and it expands, and although the ball remains the same size, it takes a longer amount of time for the ball to hit a wall of your box and trigger you. And that really helped me, because it made me realize that these huge feelings, this huge weight that I was feeling after my mom passed, was not always going to feel like that. And there are absolutely moments where I'm literally stopped in my tracks by grief. But I think if you allow time and really just space to do its thing, an acknowledgement of grief, you find that as time goes by, grief isn't this all-encompassing feeling, but rather it's a reminder of not only a life that you lived, but a love that you had. And I think it's incredibly important for people that are grieving to know that, but also for people who have yet to grieve. Because I think when we think about losing a parent and we think about grief, it's this huge taboo thing, because obviously I'm speaking to age mates, right? It's new. It's not a thing that most of my peers have experienced. So it's like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine it, you know? And so many people, actually, quick rod, don't tell people after they've lost somebody that you can't imagine losing your equivalent of that person. Like, I think that needs to be said. Don't say to someone who's just lost their mom, I can't imagine losing my mom. Buddy, neither could I. And guess what? I have to live with it. And I think, huge, tell your friends. Don't say that to people who are grieving. It's very important. I'm laughing, but it's like really offensive in the moment, right? Now that the rant is over, as I was saying, I think it's really important for it to not be a taboo for so many young people, for so many people who haven't, but also just to know that grief will not always be the scary thing, that it's something that you will it's something that you'll encounter, but it'll also be something that you'll hold close to your heart just because of the amount of love that it represents. So thank you so much for tuning in, for listening to me rant, for listening to, I guess, what grief has allowed me to experience. And I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that, you liked it. Next week, there will be another episode. It'll be on more grief, but different, right? So I think for people that don't know, I have lost both of my parents. Now, I lost my mom 4 years ago today, but I lost my dad a year ago. It would have been a year on the 31st of July. And I think the relationships that I had with both of them were incredibly different. And so grief looks different as a result. So tune back in, guys. Bye.